Hello everyone, good morning. First of all, I really want to thank Mr. and Mrs. Somani and Mr. Sood for giving me this opportunity to stand here and speak in front of you all. And actually, I'm very happy to be here and I'm very scared to be here. I'm scared because I'm speaking in front of the speakers whose book actually I have referred a lot to do the treatment, so it's a test for me also. Anyways, without wasting my time, let me start my presentation. Uh, the topic is sensory processing disorder. You know, last time when I came to Kolkata for the workshop, actually I came to know that it's lots of things about the senses need to be learned by us. Yesterday, and I'm very much sure today, maybe tomorrow, our speakers are going to use the word sensory overload, hypersensitivity, hyposensitivity. But actually, it's very important for all of us to know about what these terms are basically all about. So that's the reason I have chosen this topic, the sensory processing disorder. Now, before going for the definition of sensory processing disorder, it's very important for us to go for our five familiar senses. We all know that, so I'm not going to waste too much of a time in it. So the five familiar senses that respond to the sensory input from outside our body. Now that's very important, outside of our body. Obviously one is auditory, the information that goes through our ears. Gustatory, the information that goes through our mouth. Olfactory or smell, that the information going through our nose. Visual information going through our eyes. And the tactile, that information that goes through our tactile touch system. But as I have referred here, outside our body, we have two more senses which are very, very, very important. And those senses are, as I have mentioned in the slide, we have two hidden senses that respond to sensory input inside our body. So we have two senses inside our body which actually plays a very, very important role. And one of them is a vestibular sense and the other is the proprioceptive sense. Okay, let me make you understand in a more practical way. Vestibular is equivalent to balance and equilibrium. What does this mean? So supposedly if I'm standing on one leg, I am able to balance myself. It's just because my vestibular system is working very well. And the other thing which the vestibular sense does is gives me the orientation about my spatial level. So I have a good spatial orientation, like suppose if I'm going back, so I'm very much confident that till the fourth or fifth step, I'll be able to, I know what is behind me, and maybe after the fifth step, I'll become a little bit more conscious because I can touch the banner beside me. So that spatial awareness about my environment, that is basically provided by the vestibular system. And the other hidden sense is a proprioceptive. Okay, let me give you one more example of the proprioceptive. That will be more easier. Supposedly, if I have a 30 kgs of a sack which I have to pick it up and put it on the table, how will I do it? How will I do it? I'll do most probably like, and then I'll put it here. Am I right? This is a way of doing it. Now the question comes, why did I use my both hands? I would have done like this, no? Because we really don't have a 30 kgs of sack here. So I should have done like this also. But in fact, I tried it to do it with my both hands. Why? Why I tried it? The reason is I know it's very heavy. I can't do it with my one hand. I need both hands to do it. This sense is basically stored in our muscles and our in joints, which gives a message to the brain, look, I can't do it. I need the other hand for it. This sort of a sense, which is given by our muscles, our ligaments, our joints, is known as a proprioceptive sense. Am I right? So now we know that we have seven senses, five from the external and two inside our body. Okay? So what does the word processing means? Well, there will be an input which needs to go through our senses to our brain. The brain needs to process it, and it needs to give an output. It's not so simple, but let me make it a little bit simpler for you. It's just like a computer, how the computer works. You need to put an input, the computer needs to process it, and then it'll give you the results. So, the stimulus which needs to go to the brain will go through the senses, am I right? Then the brain will be able to have it, process it, and then it'll give the output. Now, what does the output here means? The output here means movements or the responses. If you are not able to give the responses, that means the output is not proper. So this is a simple definition of processing. This is how processing works. So now I am shuffling a little bit of my slides here, and I don't know. So fine, I have to operate from here. Okay. So what does the sensory processing disorder means? So the sensory processing disorder is a condition in which the brain has a problem in receiving or responding to the information, to the input that comes in through our senses. Okay? So we know how the processing works. Supposedly, if the input which is coming to our brain, or the brain is not able to process that input properly, we termed it as a sensory processing disorder. And what will be the result out of it? The result will be either the output, there will be no output, or maybe the output will be a little bit vague. Okay. So, how many types of sensory dysfunctions we have? We in fact have 3 types of sensory dysfunctions, though I have mentioned 2 here. One is hyposensitivity and one is hypersensitivity. Now, let me make you understand in this way. If our brain needs to process something, it needs to have certain amount of input so that it can actually process it. So if the intensity of the input is too high, so high that the brain is not able to process that, or the intensity of the stimulus is so low that still the brain is not able to process it, is termed as sensory dysfunction. So in hypersensitivity, what happens is basically the intensity of the sensory input is so high that the brain is not able to process, and we termed it as a hypersensitivity. Similarly, in hyposensitivity, the intensity of the stimulus is so low that my brain is not able to process again. Now, when I'm talking about the intensity, I basically want to say the stimulus, the intensity of the stimulus where a normal person can give you the responses. A normal if I'm talking about a child or an adult, in a normal intensity, if supposedly somebody is talking, I should be able to hear it. Normally we should be able to hear it, but maybe a child who has an SPD will not be able to hear it because of the intensity. So this is what our sensory dysfunction is. And the third one, which I'm sorry I haven't mentioned it here, is the seekers. This is very, very, very important, because if we are talking about the spectrum, the seekers are very common. What do you mean by seekers? Seekers means a child or a person who continuously seeks for the input, continuously seeks for the sensory input. Why do they do that? This is, this is just because, actually can you put the cell back? So this is just because they don't want to keep their brain at rest position. They always want to keep their brain working, working, working. And just because they want to do it, they will keep on seeking the sensory input. Let me give you an example, a very common example which every one of us knows. Many of the kids spin the objects, or maybe they spin around the chairs or the tables, or maybe while walking they keep on touching the walls and keep on walking it. So what they are basically doing, they are seeking that input. And this is very common in the spectrum cases. Okay, so we have three sort of dysfunctions: hypo, hyper, and the seekers. Now let's get back to my these slides. Now, what is the importance of the tactile system? Basically, I'm going to talk about three systems here: the tactile, the proprioceptive, and the vestibular. Okay, so here I'm going to discuss what is the importance of the tactile system and what if we have a dysfunction of the tactile system. Okay, so tactile system is required for socialization. Why? Because socially we need to be, suppose a child is in the school, so he needs to sit with somebody, some child, he needs to be in the circle with other kids, he need to be standing online where somebody can be in front, somebody can be in the back of him. So there is a probability that somebody can touch him, there is a probability that he needs to touch somebody. And if the child is sensitive to these sort of a sense, like tactile sensitive, if a child is hypersensitive, where the normal intensity of a stimulus is too high, what will I do? If the intensity is too high, I will avoid it, isn't it? So, if I am hypersensitive to touch sensation, what will I do? I will not try to sit on the circle. I will not try to sit and do the group activities. And in the end, the result will be that there will be a poor socialization. Okay? Now, the second is exploring the things in the environment. See, whatever we are exploring in the environment, whatever we are exploring through our tactile senses. If I am doing something, if I'm playing with some peg, or if I'm doing, maybe feeding myself, trying to do something, I do it with my fingers, and that means I'm doing with my touch sensations. So if I am hyposensitive or hypersensitive, what will happen? I will not explore the things in the environment. And what will be the result of not exploring? I will have a poor learning. Because kids learn through exploration. You need to explore to be a good learner. Okay. Similarly, fine motor activities. Obviously, if I have to fix a peg, if I have to open a lunchbox, or whatever fine motor activities I have to do, my finger needs to do it, and my touch sensation needs to be quite good. Again, in hypersensitive kids, the kids who have a small amount of input is too much for them, they are going to avoid it. And if it's hyposensitive, maybe they need more amount of tactile sensations to do the work. Okay? Eating. Now, I have put eating because we all, as an Indian, use our fingers to feed. Am I right? We have rice with our hands, we break chapati. So, let me give you an example. Whenever I do the assessment, I ask a very common question to the parents, like how he feeds himself. And maximum answers which we get is that I'm talking about a child at the age of 6 and 7 who has come for the assessment. The parent says, I feed him. I said, why? Because either he plays too much with the food, or he doesn't want, either he plays too much or he avoids touching it. So what he does, if he'll have one bite, he'll start rubbing it with his clothes. So he becomes very messy, so it's better that I should feed him. So actually what signs the kids is showing is basically the tactile sensitivities. So that's the reason eating is very important question to be asked in an assessment if you are doing in an Indian environment. And obviously attention, if you're not doing certain things, your attention will not be so good. Okay? So now let's move to what is the importance of the proprioceptive sense. Now, you need to have a good muscle tone and strength. Suppose I have to throw a 5 kgs of a ball at the distance of 2 meters. the muscle strength required will be different than throwing a plastic ball of 5 grams at a distance of 2 meters. Am I right? The muscle tone is entirely different. So, to do certain activities, you need to have good muscle tone, you need to have a good strength. Secondly, the ideas of variable forces required for the specific activities. Many of the kids write with a very low pressure that you can't even see what they are writing. Many of the kids write with a very high pressure that can even tear the paper. Am I right? Now, so what does this mean? To do certain activities, there is a variation in the forces which you required. Just let me give you one more example. If you are buttoning a coat button, the pressure of buttoning is different than when you are putting up the shirt button. So there is, you are doing the buttoning, but there is a variation. So a child who has a poor proprioceptive sense will actually not be able to vary his forces accordingly. So what will be the result? Obviously, if you'll not be able to vary it, your gross motor skills, your fine motor skills are also going to get devoid of it. Okay? So that's very important. The proprioceptive sense is really very important for us. And the other is the importance of having a good vestibular system. As I told you, vestibular, just take it simply. Vestibular means balance and equilibrium. If I don't have a good balance, I'll not be able to perform certain activities. Let's give you an example. If I'll not have a good balance, I'll not be able to stand here and talk. So what does the balance mean? Balance means if I'm standing straight, my both the legs are taking weight together, and that's the reason I'm in an erect position. So if my vestibular system is not working properly, so maybe I have a very poor balance, maybe I have a very poor equilibrium. So what will be the result if I have a poor balance or poor equilibrium? Obviously, if I need to do a eye-hand coordination exercises, one of the very simple example is if I am doing a target throwing. So first, supposedly if I have a very poor balance, will be I able to throw the ball in a target? No. So that means my eye-hand coordination will not work properly. Bilateral activities. Bilateral means doing the activities with both the hands together. So if you want to use both the hands together, you need to use it the center of your body. So that means if I don't have a good balance, I'll not be able to use my bilateral thing. Why we need a bilateral sequence? The reason why we need a bilateral activity is because buttoning is a bilateral activity which you have to use both the hands. Opening a lunch box, you need a bilateral activity. Or maybe if you're holding a bowl and you are feeding yourself, you need a bilateral thing where both the hand needs to work together. And one of the very important thing, if you have a vestibular dysfunction, you will have poor speech and language. Okay? So that was the three sensory systems, and what if we have any issues or dysfunction of that sensory systems. Now, uh, it's very important for us to know not every sensory processing child is in spectrum. That means not every SPD child is autistic. But yes, large population of autism have sensory processing disorders. Okay? So if a child who is being assessed with a sensory processing disorder, it's not that he is autism. But in maximum cases of autism, what we see that yes, they have a sensory processing disorders somewhere. So that's very important to know. So let's move. We have done this. Okay. Why it's very important for us to know about this sensory processing? These are not so old terms for you. These are very new terms for us. As an educator, see what the Indian system is. Usually the diagnosis of the autism is at the age of 3 and a half. And then what happens is many of the parents come to us, and when we ask them, how do you come to know that your child is having an autism, and why did you went for the assessment, and what age did you went for the assessment, they said, they usually say that we go for the assessment by 3 or 3 and a half with a single complaint that he is not settled in the class. He is not listening to us. He is not following the commands. And then we get a complaint from the school that you need to get your child assessed. So this means, as a primary teacher, it's very, very, very important for us to know about this sensory processing disorders, because it's better early to detect and early to treat. Okay, so imagine if I am treating a sensory processing disorder child at the age of 2, I'll get much better result if I am treating a child of SPD at the age of 5. Okay, so that's the reason I'm saying, as a teacher, as a parent, you need to know a lot about the sensory processing. Okay, so sensory processing issues can be noticed by the parents or maybe the teachers or the caregivers if their child has an unusual responses to the noise, to light, to touch. They may also notice clumsiness and difficulty in fine motors and gross motors. You can easily go through it. As a teacher, as a parent, you can see these things. Maybe whenever you switch on the lights, he is responding very unusual way, or maybe when the vessel of the pressure cooker, or maybe with the noise of the mixer grinder, he is very, very, very uncomfortable. So these are the signs where, if the sensory input is coming, either it's too high for him or he is not responding in a proper way. Okay. Similarly, it's very common. The SPD kids are very clumsy. You know what clumsy means? The clumsy means you have a very low postural control. You look very lethargic sort of a person. So these are the signs of clumsiness. And obviously, the fine motor and gross motor skills, that is also not age appropriate. You know, I always say, and I take lots of workshops in normal primary classes in primary school. I always tell them it's not so difficult. It's really not so difficult to assess this. Just get a checklist downloaded from the internet and try to do it with the kids and see if they are doing it or not. You have a checklist of 2 years old, you have a checklist for 3 year old, you have a checklist for 4 years old. So if you don't want to use an assessment scale, it's better you can use a checklist for them. So that will give a good idea whether the skills are age appropriate or not. And if it is not, you can actually warn the parents that something is wrong, you need to get it assessed. Okay? Okay. Those were where the kids is not behaving, or maybe the behavior to the sensory input was not so good. Now here is something which is even more horrifying. Like, the sensory processing disorder can also create lots of behavior issues, and which are very common, what I'm going to discuss. Screaming if they are touched. So many of the parents come and tell us that it's very hard time to make him bathe. Or on the other hand, they also say that he loves water. He can bathe for hours and hours. So depending upon what sort of a dysfunction it is, but yes, so these are the free alarming situation for the parents. If the child is showing extreme behaviors, like screaming if they are touched, throwing tantrums when you are trying to get them dressed, having an unusual high and low pain threshold, which is very common, crashing into the walls and floors, bumping here and there, putting inedible things, including rock, paints, into your mouth. Now, usually, as in professional, we use two sensory scales to check whether the child is having a sensory issues or not. One of them is SPM, sensory processing measure. So you can write it down, and I want you to go and read about these things. And the second is a sensory profile by Winnie Dunn. Okay, so these are the two very good scales which we use to assess whether the child is having a sensory issues or not. So, what can you do? As a parent, as a teacher, it's very important first to see what are the sensory stimulus which is creating a problem. So try to understand the sensory contribution to the behaviors. It's better if you can actually remove that extra stimulus, if it's in your control. Now the thing is, when we read the books from the foreign authors, they usually say that it's better you should remove the excess amount of sensory. But uh, in India, having so much of population and crowd, practically sometimes it becomes very, very difficult because in classes you have nearly 40 odd kids. Just think about how much auditory sound is there, and the fan is moving, and the traffic is going. So you cannot control everything. But anyways, let's go back here. So let's try to reduce the extraneous sound or the visual clutters or whatever the sensory stimulus issue is having. Infuse body-centered sensory motor activities in daily routine. So what you can do is you can induce the sensory diet to the child depending upon the issues in his daily routine. And obviously you can refer to the occupational therapist or the SI certified, so to get assessed whether that's a behavior or it's a sensory issues. So there are certain home activities which basically, yeah, there are certain home activities or maybe the activities which I make the teachers to learn a lot, the primary teachers I'm talking about, so that actually they can organize or they can relax the child a little bit. So the passive therapies such as brushing, joint compression, deep pressure, heavy work before, during and after school every day. This will help them to organize themselves for the longer period of time. And actually I do it, and parents say me that yes, there is an effect. So what I do when I prepare a sensory diet, I tell them to do a little bit of a passive therapy for 15-20 minutes before your child is going to the school. Maybe if it's possible when he is coming back, do it again, and do it when he is going to go for the sleep in the night. And what happens basically, and this is a result which we have seen, they say, the teachers are saying that he is much settled in the school now. He is at least sitting in the class and he is concentrating. So, but again, this never happens always because these are the passive therapies I'm talking about. But yes, you could try this and it can really help you a lot. So as a caregiver, as a teacher, I'm sorry, I have just 2 minutes. As a caregiver, it's very important for you to learn these passive therapies. It's a very simple exercises you can do with them. Swinging, moving, and spinning are also advised. Uh, it's very important whenever we are doing any sort of a swing or moving or spinning activities, it needs to be done in a controlled way. We cannot leave a child just like that. He may, instead of becoming organized, he can disorganize himself. Similarly, encourage tactile play, sandwich him in the mattresses, blanket, wrap him, and again, jumping, climbing, hanging, pushing, pulling activities, which you all should learn, I think, to again, to organize them. You can use a certain equipments like trampoline, bungee swing, gym ball to work as a sensory organization equipments. Now, what are the sensory perspective of early signs of autism? I'm talking about the sensory perspective. If your child is having a very high response or under response to the sensory input, which is normal for the others, or if there is too much of fight and flight responses to unexpected sensory input, less or high threshold to the pain, seeking too much of sensations like looking at lights, spinning the objects, getting excited or flapping, or maybe self-stimulating behaviors such as headbanging, rocking, that actually interferes to the social interaction. He is very picky eater, very poor tracking the objects and the people around him. He has very he has difficulty in upright standing in a normal sitting position, or maybe he has a very clumsy posture, very poor gross motor and fine motor skills, and the most important thing, which I believe is imitations. If he has a poor imitation. So these are the early signs of autism, and I have finished my last slide, so I was on time. Okay, so thank you everyone. I was a little bit fast, but thank you.